It's Wednesday, March 8th, 2017, and this is KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors comes to you from the Futures Lab studio at the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Amy Simons, and here with me are my colleagues Brett Johnson and Earnest Perry. On our program this week, President Donald Trump's claim that former President Obama ordered his phones tapped ahead of the election. We'll talk about where and how he got that idea and how it's been playing out these past few days. Reporting on medical breakthroughs. So often those stories sound so promising, yet the findings never really hold up. And today is the International Women's Day, a perfect time for us to look at the role of women in newsrooms and across the country. Advances made, and in some cases, ground lost. There's a lot more that hopefully we'll get to as well, but let's start with a story that came out yesterday morning that at its most basic level, its most attention-grabbing headline. Here you go. The BBC contacted Facebook about the spread of child porn on the social network, and Facebook called the cops on the BBC. So it's a little bit more nuanced than that. Here's what happened. The BBC was investigating how Facebook handles images of child exploitation and flagged 100 photos. Of those, Facebook removed 18, saying that the photos were in fact a violation of the site's terms of service. Facebook agreed to do an interview with the BBC to talk about this, but only if the Beeb would provide examples of the material. BBC complied, and Facebook responded by canceling the interview and reported the journalist to the UK's National Crime Agency because it is against the law for anyone to distribute images of child exploitation. That's a heck of a way to get out of an interview that you don't want to have to sit down for.
Yeah, when I read the story, then I sat back and I thought about it and I read it again. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. You said we'll meet with you only if you send us the photos, then you send the photos, and then they call the cops. And this all turns back on Facebook. And the question I'm asking is, why didn't you just go ahead and sit down for the interview, talk about the things that you are doing, because they are trying to combat this, and then talk about how others can help in doing that? I mean, you can turn this around, but this is not the way you do it.
And this is just the latest chapter in a battle between journalism institutions and Facebook, particularly as journalism institutions try to paint Facebook as a media company. Everything that happened last year with fake news and trending. And back in September, they took down the photo, Nick Ute's photo of the Napalm Girl, that iconic photo. And
because it was a naked child.
Exactly. And so they can take that down, but images of child abuse that are nothing but images of child abuse don't violate their terms of service. I think what news organizations are trying to do is trying to hold Facebook accountable at every single level, whether it's with removing images, whether it's with fake news or its algorithm or its human editors, to say you are a media institution, you need to be held accountable. And this is just the latest battle on that front.
But to me, it's one of those things where I think Facebook wants to have its cake and eat it too. It is sort of put itself out there as the place where you can go to get information, be it news, be it information about your friends, be it information about, cooking or anything. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, you do open yourself up to criticism. And this, again, is one of those instances where Facebook is basically saying, well, yes, we do have this strong agreement that people have to adhere to, but we don't want to be the ones policing ourselves. Well, you can't have it both ways.
Right, and it's just so ironic that, and this is something, just to kind of give some context, we're talking about British law here. The same thing would have happened in America. There is no First Amendment protection, even for journalists. If you're an investigative journalist doing a piece on child pornography, courts have said you are not even allowed to have it then. They don't want to create some kind of First Amendment exception to having images of child abuse. But again, Facebook, I like what you said, Ernest, wants to have its cake and eat it too. They want to be a tech company. Mark Zuckerberg stresses all the time, we are a tech company. We are not a media company. And news organizations are trying really, really hard to say, no, you're not. You're a media company just like us. You need to follow the same rules.
So is this one of those instances then where, in that vein of following the same rules, they need to have more human interaction and less algorithmic in order to work on this issue?
Yes. Here's a perfect example of when Facebook could have had a spokesman, a human, talk to the BBC, try to explain this is what we're trying to do, and be able to manage the situation. Instead, they sort of fell back on this standard of, well, you sent those to us, and by law, we must turn you in. I mean, that seems kind of crazy. I mean, it goes back to the issue you brought up in September about the napalm photo, when you could have easily said, look, this is an historic representation of what was going on during Vietnam, and therefore it doesn't necessarily meet that pedophilia standard. Yeah. So we're going to leave that up. No, you decide to go in the other direction and create more of a controversy than it really needed to be.
Yeah, I mean, Facebook, whether it's human editors or whether it's algorithms, it's just a black box. And we need to, I think Facebook has a duty to open up and let us see inside that black box.
Okay, well, remember last week when we were talking about how we'd be expecting a few days of quiet from Donald Trump on Twitter following the address to the joint session of Congress? Well, Saturday morning, almost as if on cue, 3 new posts claiming that former President Barack Obama had tapped his telephones at the Trump Tower ahead of the election. Mind you, this happened a bit more than 24 hours after his Attorney General, Jeff Sessions' news conference about his meetings with the Russian ambassador, and that Sessions would end up recusing himself from the investigation into Russia's involvement in the election if necessary. Okay, so there are a couple of points to make here. First, a president does not have the authority to order wiretaps. That has to come from a federal judge. And here's another one, a biggie. There's no evidence this ever happened. And that had to make it hard on Deputy Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders. She was the surrogate sent to all of the Sunday talk shows this week. Let's take a listen to the exchange between her and ABC's Martha Raddatz.
If this happened, if this is accurate, this is the biggest overreach and the biggest scandal.
The President of the United States is accusing the former president of wiretapping him.
I think that this is, again, something that if this happened, Martha, if. I agree.
Why is the president saying it did happen?
Look, I think he is going off of information that he's seen that has led him to believe that this is a very real potential. And if it is, this is the greatest overreach and the greatest abuse of power that I think we've ever seen, and a huge attack on democracy itself. And the American people have a right to know if this took place.
I guess that's why Sanders gets paid the big bucks to go out there and take these shots from reporters and to defend him. This was just one of them, and it was tame compared to what happened with George Stephanopoulos.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if ifs and buts were candy and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas. And she's out there keeps saying, and Martha Raddatz is right. You keep saying, if. Yeah. He's saying the former president did, and there's no evidence. Even the FBI director is asking the Justice Department to stop with this. So it's almost like he throws these tweets out to try to divert the conversation about what's really going on, which there is an investigation of Russian hacking that could be linked back to Trump, in which you've had Mike Flynn, who stepped down as national security advisor. You have Jeff Sessions, who is recusing himself because he had contacts with the Russians, even though he said it during his confirmation hearings that he did not. So you have some definite trails toward the Trump administration that this investigation is going.
But don't look at any of that, because Barack Obama tapped his phones.
Exactly. So I mean, and one of the stories that you have on our links blog from the Washington Post talks about how Trump is just incensed about the leaks. He's incensed about the way in which the media is covering this story, and it sort of goes all the way through how even when he leaves the White House and goes down to Florida, he is still obsessed with it, and then he jumps in with the tweets, which makes it even worse. So it's just chaos 24/7 at the White House about what's going on, and he can't seem to stop the recreation of the chaos from day to day.
It becomes a cycle.
It becomes a cycle.
One of the things that was said was that he got this information from media reports. Talk for a minute, Brett, about how this came to be? Where does Donald Trump say that this story came from?
Well, from what I read, this originated, this allegation originated on InfoWars, on Alex Jones's site, and then it moved to talk radio, and then Breitbart, which has kind of become the nucleus for kind of ultra conservative. Pseudo news, pseudo conspiracy. That is what that altogether came to Donald Trump, and then he tweeted about it, and then it became news all over. I think the role the line between sites like Breitbart, sites like InfoWars, fake news, legitimate fake news, not what those sites call fake news, and mainstream partisan news like Fox News, that line is getting blurred. And I think the administration and Donald Trump in particular is exploiting that. And you look at one of the tweets, he called this just like Nixon or Watergate. This is like the kid on the playground who is accused of hitting another kid, but said, but that kid hit me, right?
That kid hit me first.
Exactly right. So if everyone's focusing on how the Russian investigation is so much like Watergate, I think the New York Times had a headline said, "This is echoes of Watergate." Well, of course, he's going to bring up Watergate to even the playing field.
Yeah, to me, it's one of those things where Donald Trump and I would say Steve Bannon in particular are obsessed with making sure that their point of view is out there. They talk about how the mainstream media does not give them their just due, and a lot of it goes back to this is their deep philosophical mistrust of the news media, of the government bureaucracy, and you see more and more of it, of the security state, as they call it, and they want to try to sort of bring that out into the open and to use it as a weapon against their enemies.
So it's not that often that we have segues that end up becoming quite this clean, but I want to talk about a little bit more in depth about Breitbart and a study that was published in the Columbia Journalism Review that really looks at the effect that this one publication has had on the media ecosystem. In an era of fake news, what this study looked at is how sites like Breitbart specifically take stories that have a small kernel of truth in them and then spin them. Bring some of that pseudo conspiracy that you mentioned a minute ago. Yeah,
I think it's amazing, and I think what's amazing too, reading this piece, was these are sites that are only about 10 years old. Breitbart and I think InfoWars might be a bit older, but I see this as the analogy I'll bring up here is like a religion, right? So often in religion, if you're a zealot, who can be the most zealous, right? Who can be the most pious, the most religious? I think we're seeing that right now with conservative news sites. Who can push the envelope even further? Breitbart has been the leader, and it's been so well connected in terms of setting the agenda for news. But it's also pushing. It's created this market for sites like InfoWars or others, whether it's fake news or whether it's pseudo news, to prove themselves, to say, no, we are actually we're the most zealous. We're the one who can push the envelope most, and that's kind of frightening for journalism and for democracy.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you want to really look at this is the partisan press taking it even a step further, because if you go back and you look at the partisan press of the early republic, they were connected to political parties. Well, when you look at Breitbart and you look at InfoWars and those, they're connected to a political philosophy. And they're driving that home, and they're able to shape the way in which media that's not supposed to be connected to any kind of partisan political philosophy or political party, how they are looking at the news. So you have the mainstream media, as we call it, now reporting on what Breitbart is talking about, and they're trying to sort of say, well, wait a minute, there's more to this story than meets the eye. But if you fall into line, if you cover that story, period, now all of a sudden you're basically pushing it out there.
You're validated.
And you're validated, and that's what's happening here.
Well, it's happened to get another dump from WikiLeaks. This time more than 8,000 documents, which show the tools that the Central Intelligence Agency uses to break into our smartphones, computers, even our smart TVs. And the documents claim that the CIA has figured out how to hack the Android platform to bypass messaging apps like Signal and WhatsApp, intercepting data and messages before encryption can be applied. How big of a deal is this data dump?
I think it's a huge deal because you're going to have people who are worried about, well, wait a minute, what do they know about me, or how are they tapping into my particular phone? Especially now that they're saying, hey, they can actually tap into Apple and they can tap into Macs, because at a certain point, people thought, well, they can do this to Android and the PCs, but Apple has got this sort of monopoly and they're able to thwart this.
It was impenetrable.
It was impenetrable. Well, that's not the case anymore. Yeah. So I think that in that regard, it is a big deal. I think what WikiLeaks has done, though, is by not releasing names and the codes on how they did it, which is different from what they did back when in the last dump. Yeah. I think that they're sort of trying to protect themselves a little bit from what could happen from a legal perspective, and I'm sure you could talk a little bit more about that, Brett.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I'll just add, the timing could not be worse for the CIA for this to come out, especially when in the early days of the Trump administration, or leading up into before the inauguration, where President Trump accused the CIA of being political, what we're seeing is kind of one by one institutions of governments. And granted, the CIA is pretty clandestine, not that it has the highest regard among citizens. But I think this, whatever trust citizens had in the CIA to keep them safe, I think it's now at a new low. You combine that with the rhetoric of the CIA is hyper-partisan that the Trump administration has been putting forth. I think that the CIA is going to have to do some serious damage control.
But the other part to this, which I think is interesting, if you go to the Stories on Links blogs that talk about this, is the fact that much of this information could have come from the Russians, because a lot of the data that's been coming from WikiLeaks lately is connected to the Russians, especially when you talk about the hacking of the Democratic National Committee and that sort of thing, which came through WikiLeaks and other organizations. So many mainstream journalism organizations that are reporting on this story are a little leery about the way in which they're reporting it, because there could be some Russian links here and the current investigation that's going on, which also goes back to the Trump administration.
Which is another pattern that we're seeing, is reporters' very different relationship with WikiLeaks, as we've seen with each of these different data dumps that have come down the line.
Well, because there could be some sort of foreign actor involved in providing this information to WikiLeaks, because it's not like WikiLeaks is going out and doing investigations themselves. They're basically taking information that someone has provided to them and putting it out,
or obtaining it legally through a Freedom of Information Act request.
Exactly. So I mean, it's to me, it's one of those things where journalists are starting to question how WikiLeaks is getting this information, which is something that they didn't do enough of in the previous data dumps by the organization.
Okay, well, sometimes as journalists, we need to think twice about what we choose to report on, and that might be something put out there by WikiLeaks, or it might be something like a new recent medical breakthrough discovered by scientists at universities across the country. But we're finding, in a study, of course, that those breakthroughs that journalists love to report on oftentimes don't pan out. They make good headlines, though, don't they? I mean, that's why we jump on them.
Well, yeah, I mean, we jump on them because they do make good headlines, but this isn't anything new. This happens all the time, which is one of the reasons why when you have journalists who actually do the reporting to check the facts before they put it out there, that is important. And oftentimes we don't do that because either we don't have the time, or there's some sort of quid pro quo between the news organization and the medical association or the medical group that's putting this out there.
And no one wants to read a story that says, eat things in moderation and diet and exercise, and
or that extra glass of wine is going to give you a heart attack.
Right, exactly.
Or that piece of chocolate is going to actually help you.
Exactly right. I mean, this is institutionalized clickbait. You put whether if it's on the New York Times or your local broadcast station, if you say, eating a bar of chocolate a day is going to extend your life by 10 years, 6 months, right? Exactly. That's going to drive traffic and regardless of how true it is or not.
Okay, well, you remember last week we talked about that New York Times ad, the one that ran during the Oscars. It was about truth. And the St. Louis Post-Dispatch tried to do something similar, only it hasn't really gotten the same high praise. In fact, few people even saw the ad before it was pulled down from the paper's marketing website. Why, do you ask? Well, it turned out that the reporters and editors shown hard at work in the ad weren't Post-Dispatch staffers. They were actors straight out of Central Casting. What is the company saying about this now that it's kind of sort of been caught?
Well, I think that what they were trying to say is we were trying to demonstrate that we are out there doing the types of journalism that the public really deserves.
Right, but the theme was truth.
I know. It was one of those, why did you do this? You didn't have to. You could have easily just went out and taken some pictures of your own reporters and put those up, and actually that would have been much more truthful. Take the time to do it right, I guess.
Well, I think ironically this could not be more true. The more that news organizations are moving toward stock photos. I mean, you go to the BBC now, and most of their stories, if they don't have someone out in the field, most are illustrated with stock photos.
Mm-hmm.
So it's ironically truth. This could not be more true.
So if you're somebody at home, do you now trust the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, or do you look at them and go, really, and just kind of move on?
Well, I mean, you look at it, it's a commercial.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, if you look at what the New York Times did, there was no stock photo. There were no photos at all.
It was words on a screen.
It was words on a screen. It was simple. It was concise. It basically talked about, here are the things that we do. And I think if the Post-Dispatch wanted to sort of mimic that, they should have mimicked it the way, just followed the pattern that they did, and you would have been able to do that at a local level.
And I think kind of a broader story here is news organizations trying to rebrand themselves to the public. And there's going to be bumps along the way. I think the New York Times did a great job. Not surprisingly, I'm sure they have a lot of resources to create a really great ad. There's going to be bumps along the way, like with this Post-Dispatch, as news organizations try to say, hey, no, come back to us. We are important. You need to trust us. We are vital to democracy.
So if you're one of the people who works in the newsroom at the Post-Dispatch and you see that, somebody was hired to portray you in the ad about the hard work that you're doing and that people should have trust in your reporting and the truth that you're out there pursuing doggedly every day, are you angry at your employers?
Oh, you're definitely angry at your employers. I mean, they actually put it out there on Twitter. I mean, especially after the fact that you were cutting staff and reassigning people 24, 48 hours before all this happened. They're going you could have taken that money and maybe saved a job or done something like that. So, yeah, they're upset about the fact that they were portrayed in a less than truthful light.
Okay, well, today is is International Women's Day. Maybe you've been out and about and noticed that there might have been women missing from places that you were used to seeing them, maybe at work or at school or a store, wherever that might be. All people who have taken part in the nationwide Day Without a Woman. It's a strike going on in a lot of places, and a lot of newsrooms have planned for how they're going to cover the event. A good number plan for how they'd manage for a day without the women in their newsrooms. The Cut, which is the New York Magazine's women's site, isn't publishing any fresh content today. Same with the website The Bustle. Women there have been given the day off as a paid volunteer day. At the website Jezebel, which is one of the Gizmodo sites, there are going to be 2 men taking over the site today, running content written only by men. Thoughts on the approach there?
Well, I think the approach is as adequate. I think it works. What I'd like to see is what's happening in other industries. I mean, I know we're mainly focusing on what's happening in the media industry, but I want to see how this is playing out in businesses. And when I say businesses, I'm talking about your big firms and those types of things who employ a lot of women, whether or not they're actually showing up or figuring out some other way to do that. I think when you start talking about the media, it should highlight the fact that there are a lot of women who are not in management positions, and whether or not the fact that they are walking off, what kind of impact that's going to have on how they get the news out.
Well, and I had a colleague who said they were surprised to see me at work today, and I said, well, first of all, I have classes to teach. I have a job to do. But I said, it's also Wednesday. It's Views of the News Day. And I said, look around at who's working on Views of the News. I'm the only female on the on-air side of it. I said, you look behind the scenes, too, at who's running things for us. We don't have any women back there either. Maybe my place is actually more powerful in front of the microphone today. And I'm heard more clearly there than by not being here.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this, as Ernest pointed out, this highlights the fact that, unfortunately, still in journalism, women are not in the positions of power that they should be, not in equitable positions. And to the extent that they are, if they were to leave today, to take a day off, their impact would be usurped by the males that are there. I mean, we visited some daycares today with my daughter, who you wished a happy Women's Day to, who's here, and all the workers there were women. I would have loved to have seen them walk out and put a whole bunch of families, make them think about the importance of the roles women play in our lives. Well,
and you bring up about positions in management. On our Links blog, you can find a column that was written by Liz Spade, who's the public editor at the New York Times, who mentioned that actually there's been a lot of ground lost at that newspaper since Jill Abramson was forced out as the executive editor there, that there are actually fewer women in leadership positions there. And I started thinking about it and what my experience was at the Chicago Tribune, and since the days of Anne-Marie Lipinski as the executive editor there, and since Joyce Winicki and Jane Hurt have also left their positions at the top of the masthead, that we're really kind of starting to see those patterns. Women are actually losing ground.
Yeah, I mean, it's happening because I think it's two reasons. Number one, I think that you've always had more men in the pipeline for those positions, and you're starting to see them take those positions. But I also think that the women who are in the pipeline are finding other opportunities in order to be able to, you talk about Jezebel, you talk about all the other women's sites, they see those as more of a powerful platform for them to be able to tell their stories in ways that they weren't able to do when they were with the mainstream legacy media.
Okay, well, before we go, something that's worth a chuckle, or at least a smile. A gift showed up in the White House press room, courtesy of actor Tom Hanks, a brand new espresso machine to keep the caffeine flowing. With it came a note that reads, "Keep up the good fight for truth, justice, and the American way," especially the truth part. Gotta say, gotta have a lot of caffeine if you're going to be working in that White House press corps.
Yep,
it's going to be needed.
This is the third machine from Tom Hanks. He started this in 2004. He did it 10 years later. Now here we go again with the new machine. I think he's sort of trying to do his part in trying to keep the wheels of journalism and democracy going.
And keeping them fueled with caffeine.
Yes.
Well, that music means we're pretty much out of time for this week. I'd like to thank you for spending the last half hour with us. You can read more about the topics we talked about today on our Links blog. That's under the Programs tab at KBIA.org. Like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @ViewsOnKBIA. These are all great ways to watch and listen to our program again, leave us comments or questions, see previews of what we'll be talking about next week, and more. Our thanks to RJI's Travis McMillan for directing today's show, and to Pat Akers for handling the audio. Our original theme music was composed by Tim Pilcher. Lauren Wortman is our associate producer, and I'm Amy Simons. Be sure to join us again next week when we're back with you for another edition of Views of the News.